the digitization, the automation, and then the inclusivity, or the solution reaching out to everyone in the ecosystem. That's is the key factor, and that's maybe evolving over the years. Banks have different way of seeing things, and that's where I think the NPCI plays a role. That how we can get that uniform view from a very diverse view of the different banks. So yeah, that's where we come in. It is said that people who have the fund has the easier access and the cheaper access to funds than people don't have the fund actually.
99% of enterprises in India are SMEs. So if you really take that as an example, and we talk about an SME paying another SME or an MSME, I think that's really where the challenge is in terms of figuring out what is the right way of ensuring payments and collections. Previously, there were accounting challenges to invoicing. Now there are regulatory challenges to invoicing. And I think for MSMEs, especially, to understand that if they send out an invoice, they receive an invoice, what does it actually mean from a regulatory standpoint, that it has to get paid in 45 days or you have to pay out in 45 days? What are your options to kind of figure that out? I think those are the areas that one really needs to pay attention. The B2C part is generally atomic. B2B part is a pretty involved process that takes over a period of time. So payment and a collection is really, or payments, because the collection is also a payment, I think is the fag end of the role exercise. You really have to think about everything that happens before and then help an MSME to do that. And lastly, of course, I think in India, the ability to kind of deal with the issues that come about due to compliance with law, I think are really the forefront for an MSME today. Because you do get notices, it's all become faceless, it's become automated. You see the number of notices that come to you is considerable. So I would just keep on reiterating the point that if you want to be payments and collections, that is, you're solving the 5% of the problem. And the 95% of the problem really is all the things that happened before. And that's really the area that I think we should all be paying attention to for the 95% of this, 99% of the country's enterprises.
Traditionally, what we have seen from when we talk about B2B, businesses adopt something which is convenient and fast, and digital payments have provided both of that. Change has come much more in B2C. B2B is yet to see that level of change, which I think it is in prospect, but a lot of things maybe need to be done to achieve this level of scale in B2B also. We need a UPI for B2B for sure.
In the MSME space, what you are looking for is access to working capital, right? Access to working capital quickly at the right price. Inefficiencies on your payments and collection are essentially eating up working capital, right? So I think we have to be cognizant that one is the credit linked working capital, one is working capital extended, but which is tied up because of the inefficiencies. So I think that's one fundamental point which I think many people don't yet get. Secondly, an MSME today is having to spend 70% of his time or 60% of his time in solving for all the other issues as opposed to really growing their business, right? So that is not the right kind of balance of time that the MSME needs to be spending on. So we got to find ways, whether it's working with fintechs or banks on their own, to simplify this for the MSME so that they can devote their attention to market making, market building, getting to be the best product out there and growing that business. Third, not often discussed, a very domestic lens, I think the cross-border piece is very important, right? So I think there is a lot of cross-border, I think to what Ram said, I think multiplies the problem by a factor of X, right? So whatever challenges you may have on the domestic side, notices, etc., cross-border adds a different dimension to it totally. And again, that completely swamps the MSME from being able to focus on growing the business. We have Neo for corporates, Neo for business, which is for MSMEs, which is basically providing a whole range of API stack based applications for clients. And today I think we are possibly India's largest API bank in terms of breadth and depth of APIs across both trade and cash. I think the cash API piece gets done reasonably quickly, easily, well understood. Problematic are the trade APIs, and that's where a much harder challenge was to overcome, but I think we've done that. Look, what we have seen is that I think you need clients to be receptive to drive change, right? We may have the best of the API stacks available, the solution available, but implementation is one big challenge, right? And especially think of it from an MSME point of view, who basically is running, a 10-man shop and therefore may not be able to quickly devote time attention. So therefore, what we've also additionally done in terms of best practices, we try to make it easy for the customer, right? So we've developed connectors. We worked with SAP certified architects, right? So therefore, we're saying, okay, Mr. Customer, don't worry about the integration aspects. We'll make it easy. We'll have somebody come over, have a look, whatever you're using, light version, heavy version, and basically we'll get that going. So we're also trying to go the extra mile in terms of making that happen. On the best practice side, I'll just take the trade view, because I think that's not what is often talked about, just to give you a different flavor. See, in trade, what happens is when you're doing cross-border trade, there's an ERP, but bulk of your data is actually sitting on the cross-border side outside the ERP. So you have to find a way to bring the data set outside the ERP into the ERP, send it to the banks, because banks are the authorized dealers, right? And that is how basically you go to help the client.
Today, we are going to talk about B2B payments and collections. I think that's not much we have seen talking around. We always talk about retail payments, that being transformed and all. But I think it's a very, so this field, is a very vast and intricate B2B payments that we are going to talk about. Tally is a household name for simplifying accounting for numerous SMEs and corporates. So over the 4 decades that Tally has been in use, how you have observed the behavior around payments and collection change, particularly following the events like COVID or advent of UPI?
Yeah, as Vivek said, I think there is a sea change. Traditionally, what we have seen from when we talk about B2B, businesses adopt something which is convenient and fast, and digital payments have provided both of that. So what I would say is, like, as far as again, to add to what Vivek said, cash and check were the prominent or the dominant modes of payment if I go about a decade back. And now, as per what knowledge I have, by May 24, the number of check issues or check payments has come down to 0.3% of the total payments. It shows you the scale of change which has actually happened. Just to give an example, like now if I go to a shop and give him a cash note, actually the shopkeeper looks at me at despair because he has to give me change. He'll slowly push that QR code in front of me and say, "Ki sir, isme payment kar dijiye." So and I'm talking not about organized retail. I'm talking about say a vegetable seller. That is the level at which it's gone. But yeah, I would say the change has come much more in B2C. B2B is yet to see that level of change, which I think it is in prospect, but a lot of things maybe need to be done to achieve this level of scale in B2B also.
When I as a leading trade finance and corporate payment platform in India, how does Vana view the B2B payment landscape, and how have you seen it evolve with the easier access of financing now available to businesses through digital platforms?
So I think in many ways a lot of change, but also I think a lot of the issues remain the same. I think Vivek talked about recon. So in all B2B payments, payment is a process. There's a lot of process that happens before a payment actually happens, and I think that area still continues to be very customized, very proprietary, and I think that's an area that we need to look at, especially with this MSME regulation and everything else. The second is that 99% of enterprises in India are SMEs. So if you really take that as an example, and we talk about an SME paying another SME or an MSME, I think that's really where the challenge is in terms of figuring out what is the right way of ensuring payments and collections. The third thing, of course, is that collections is the biggest issue for a lot of the SMEs, right? Large corporates are not going to kind of take embedded payment systems to pay these SMEs. They are going to do it by their own process. So we really have to think about, from a payments and a collection standpoint, what really works for 99% of the enterprises in this country, which now I'm told the latest number is about 65 million. So what works for 65 million? I think a lot of times our focus is really on the large guys and helping them to collect faster or pay better. And obviously it makes a lot of sense because that's where the money is. But if you really want to do it at scale in India, you'll have to think about what you are, how your solution is relevant to 65 million enterprises. And that will, I think, be a very different process. So I think BBPS, I think, a way of kind of trying to bring this whole system digitized for the MSME would be, I think, an interesting one.
Thanks. I think so key things coming out is that the digitization, the automation, and then the inclusivity, or the solution reaching out to everyone in the ecosystem. That's is the key factor, and that's maybe evolving over the years. We acknowledge that that a lot of evolution has happened, but what are the primary challenges that we think that the businesses still face in the realm of B2B payments and collections?
So I think, look, I mean, B2B payments continues to be the standard RTGS, NEFT, and checks, maybe to an extent. I think what Vivek talked about is continues to be the biggest issue for all B2B payments. There is reconciliation, what we call also settlement float. You got the money, but you don't know what you got the money for, or what you didn't get the money for, and trying to just make sure that you can reconcile it in your book of accounts in the tallies of the world, I think is the biggest challenge still remaining with an MSME. So I think that's one area that on the collection side one has to kind of think about. On the payment side, I think the question really is that given this GST, e-invoice, e-way bill is going to now go right up to B2C at some point in time, I think there is a lot of regulatory challenges to invoicing. These didn't exist before. Previously, there were accounting challenges to invoicing. Now there are regulatory challenges to invoicing. And I think for MSMEs, especially to understand that if they send out an invoice, they receive an invoice, what does it actually mean from a regulatory standpoint, that it has to get paid in 45 days or you have to pay out in 45 days? What are your options to kind of figure that out? I think those are the areas that one really needs to pay attention. The B2C part is generally atomic. B2B part is a pretty involved process that takes over a period of time. So payment and a collection is really, or payments, because the collection is also a payment, I think is the fag end of the role exercise. You really have to think about everything that happens before and then help an MSME to do that. And lastly, of course, I think in India, the ability to kind of deal with the issues that come about due to compliance with law, I think are really the forefront for an MSME today. Because you do get notices, it's all become faceless, it's become automated. You see the number of notices that come to you is considerable. So I would just keep on reiterating the point that if you want to be payments and collections, that is, you're solving the 5% of the problem. And the 95% of the problem really is all the things that happened before. And that's really the area that I think we should all be paying attention to for the 95% of this, 99% of the country's enterprises.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ram that we should look at the SMEs, MSMEs, if we want to make a change at a national level, because they comprise 95% of the businesses. And from a challenge perspective, definitely reconciliation is a huge challenge, because if you are not clear about who has actually paid you or not paid you, you are not able to even, you are not in a position to even say follow up or get the payments. And that person might end up saying that I had actually paid you 2 days back. So that makes people lose confidence on their system. They don't have real-time data, accurate data. That is something I think it's a big challenge. But just to add, I think from a SME perspective, you look at a typical SME, they don't have a very huge, say, accounts department or something of that sort. Now, you need aspects or usability aspects to be looked at, where you don't need training. You don't need people, because in a SME environment, you can make out, or you can realize that there are churn of resources. Now, how do I train them to even adopt such systems? This becomes even more difficult when you don't have a common platform. Like if I'm dealing with 3 banks, now I might have to go to all the 3 banks' platform to even execute the payment, but there is no centralized way of doing it. There are things which are related to finance. That is there anything that if I do a digital payment, can a finance be linked to it? I can get a sort of a bill discounting done. So again, there are avenues to improve that. And in most cases, I believe there is also cost involved right now in many cases, and SMEs work on a very thin margin. So they actually may not be able to afford that, and that also might create a friction for them to adopt such things. So I think we need a UPI for B2B for sure.
I would actually say, look, fundamentally in the MSME space, what you are looking for is access to working capital, right? Access to working capital quickly at the right price. Inefficiencies on your payments and collection are essentially eating up working capital, right? So I think we have to be cognizant that one is the credit linked working capital, one is working capital extended, but which is tied up because of the inefficiencies. So I think that's one fundamental point which I think many people don't yet get. Secondly, with the point Ram made very, very eloquently, look, what this is meaning is an MSME today is having to spend 70% of his time or 60% of his time in solving for all the other issues as opposed to really growing their business, right? So that is not the right kind of balance of time that the MSME needs to be spending on. So we got to find ways, whether it's working with fintechs or banks on their own, to simplify this for the MSME so that they can devote their attention to market making, market building, getting to be the best product out there and growing that business. Third, not often discussed, a very domestic lens, I think the cross-border piece is very important, right? So I think there is a lot of cross-border, I think to what Ram said, I think multiplies the problem by a factor of X, right? So whatever challenges you may have on the domestic side, notices, etc., cross-border adds a different dimension to it totally. And again, that completely swamps the MSME from being able to focus on growing the business. So I think that's an area that needs a lot more liberalization. There's very welcome move with the PACB guidelines that have been issued, but I think, look, that applies to folks selling to the e-commerce platforms, etc. There is a whole bunch of other importer-exporters that we could talk about. So, look, I think those would be some of the areas that I would think are very important for us as an industry participant to facilitate and to champion with the regulators. Yeah.
How you think the companies can seamlessly integrate modern payment solutions with the existing ERP and accounting system that could result into some of this, integrated and automated reconciliation?
Yeah, the challenge, or I would say the solution, primarily should revolve around that how can the MSME or any business look at this from a single system platform perspective. Today, or I would say generally, people keep their accounting system and the payment system different because it's not possible or not easily available for them to sort of work on a common platform when it comes to these two things. So yes, I think we require more standardized APIs, whether it is across banks, whether it is across payment aggregators or payment gateways, which will help players like us, the business management solutions, to sort of integrate this much faster rather than trying to integrate with individual players, because that doesn't become very viable, and that is where I think the gaps come. And the fact that I am raising a invoice, I get up and I can send a collection request of payment. When the payment comes, I see it. If everything happens on the same platform, the aspect of reconciliation can drastically come down as a challenge. So the main factor is that we should look at integratively between different players in the payment space and the ERP systems to ensure that there is a single interface on which the customer is working on. They don't have to go to different platforms to do different tasks, to ensure that these type of frictions are reduced.
Okay, so Vivek, so taking this, so he said, standardized API, and easy integration across different platforms. So like to hear from you that, when you have seen many businesses, getting modernized into their payments and all that. So can you share some of the best practices that the businesses has taken to modernize their payments and the collection, and some success story from your experience?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think we've been very cognizant of some of these challenges, and approximately about 24 plus months back, set out on a very ambitious journey to build out our own capabilities as a bank under the moniker of NEO. So I think we have NEO for corporates, NEO for business, which is for MSMEs, which is basically providing a whole range of API stack based applications for clients. And today I think we are possibly India's largest API bank in terms of breadth and depth of APIs across both trade and cash. I think the cash API piece gets done reasonably quickly, easily, well understood. Problematic are the trade APIs, and that's where a much harder challenge was to overcome, but I think we've done that. Look, what we have seen is that I think you need clients to be receptive to drive change, right? We may have the best of the API stacks available, the solution available, but implementation is one big challenge, right? And especially think of it from an MSME point of view, who basically is running, a 10-man shop and therefore may not be able to, quickly devote time, attention. So therefore, what we've also additionally done in terms of best practices, we try to make it easy for the customer, right? So we've developed connectors. We worked with SAP certified architects, right? So therefore, we're saying, okay, Mr. Customer, don't worry about the integration aspects. We'll make it easy. We'll have somebody come over, have a look, whatever you're using, light version, heavy version, and basically we'll get that going. So we're also trying to go the extra mile in terms of making that happen. On the best practice side, I'll just take the trade view, because I think that's not what is often talked about, just to give you a different flavor. See, in trade, what happens is when you're doing cross-border trade, there's an ERP, but bulk of your data is actually sitting on the cross-border side outside the ERP. So you have to find a way to bring the data set outside the ERP into the ERP, send it to the banks, because banks are the authorized dealers, right? And that is how basically you go to help the client, right? So I think that's a very different nuance, and therefore we have seen with very, very progressive corporates the willingness to say, great, I mean, this is something which is a long solution, long asked for solution, wasn't there in the market. We'll actually go ahead with it. But many are still continuing to operate in the traditional way. So whatever is off the ERP is maintained on Excels or some other application. So look, I think where we have seen successes, for instance, talking domestic, for instance, we've actually worked very well in implementing an account receivable solution, right? On the collection side with an anchor client, or many anchor clients actually with their distributors. And more importantly, while that is fully digitized, we've also actually bolted on the financing element on the supply chain side with it. So net-net, I think you're actually helping the client on two things. One is to help them grow sales. Second is to make sure whatever receipts are coming actually are being reconciled direct back to the ERP. So a number of success stories in that domain that we have seen so far.
So wonderful, Vivek. So I think what we're hearing is that banks can build the API, can standardize API, but now we need also players who can take it to the market or can drive the customer adoption side. So that's what coming out. So now, Ram, I think it's leading to the next question that, we're looking for collaboration and partnership, that, different players building different part of the stack, and that's how we are going towards the customers consumer adoption. So how important do you think the collaboration partnership are in driving innovation in B2B payments? Can you describe how Viana collaborates with banks and fintechs to enhance this B2B payment solutions?
Yeah, so we, right from beginning, and now this is my third startup over 30 years. I think one thing I'm very clear about is that without banks and NBFCs, you really have no business being in the entire cash management transaction banking space. So you have to collaborate. And I think what's nicely happened over the many years is that banks have started looking at fintechs as a very vital proposition in their ability to expand the market or to reach out and distribution, as well as to kind of create new products quickly. And I think that's the reason why I think we have been very successful in working with banks. And I think it's always been, unlike general popular stereotype of being very difficult people to work with, we have found it actually quite nice to work with. So maybe we are a little out of the normal pattern. I think the key thing really is for us to figure out, I think, the scale problem. And I think one of the things that when we work with a bank, obviously the bank is at the center of the universe, believes that all customers are only going to use their platform. Whereas if you put yourself in the place of the corporate or the MSME, they are actually dealing with multiple banks, multiple NBFCs for multiple different programs, multiple different products. So if you really sit at it, whether you're a CFO of a very, very large corporate or you're talking about a very small business owner, they really require a little bit of an aggregated view, and they require, going back to what Abhishek mentioned, really an ability to kind of seamlessly move between not only from their accounting systems to the payment and collections or financing systems, but also across all the lenders that they have to deal with. I'm an entrepreneur. We take money from a lot of investors. If you have more than 5 investors on a cap table, just reporting to each one of them is a pain. Right? I mean, each one of them has a different way of looking at things. If I had 5 banks as my lenders, I would say, I probably would retire quickly, because each one would have a very different way of looking at things. The same information, but in multiple ways, right? So I think really the aspect that we have to think about is slightly go outside into this whole space and say that from a customer perspective, who is dealing with multiple banks, and now with increasingly a lot of regulatory, I think, shadow on everything that you do. I think you need to kind of then look at it from their perspective. What do they want? And I think that's where we are finding out all the challenges and the opportunities. To be able to say and invert this model and say, look, I mean, we will kind of go back to the corporate or to the small business and look at it from their perspective. And I think, in India, one of the things GST has been a great provider of information, but there are only about 12 million unique PANs in GST, right? Out of which all of them don't file regularly. At the same time, you have 65 million companies or 70 million companies in India. Payments is obviously through UPI. Now, anybody who's on the retail side, you have now a very, very good data source for what is all the payments coming in, at least from the information perspective. So, 20 years back, I would always call all lending to be a spiritual journey between the bank and the borrower. Now, thankfully, there's a little data-driven spiritual journey. So I think that's an area that I am looking at with great interest, that whether we can continuously use the payment data that's coming in and the GST as it keeps going down, and especially in invoicing, can we use that as a far better metric for trade financing at least?
Thanks, Rama. And just to add, I think, so you said, banks have different way of seeing things, and that's where I think the NPCI plays a role, that how we can, get that uniform view from a very diverse view of the different banks. So yeah, that's where we come in. I think talking about payments, fintechs, regulation is one thing that, we cannot just avoid to talk about. So my next question would be that, how does the regulatory framework in India influence the modernization of B2B payments and collections? And what do we expect from them further to encourage this journey?
Look, I mean, I think with TREDS, with the entire India stack, with account aggregation, I think there's, the entire GIFT City also from a cross-border perspective. I think there's a number of, momentous events that have happened in the space. So I think, we have to give a lot of kudos to everybody who built this infrastructure up. And you can see a pathway to kind of this getting expanded. And I come from the trade financing world, at least, where, we do a lot of invoice-based financing or purchase order-based financing. I think one requirement from our side has always been, and I was talking to a dear friend now, is that we definitely need to kind of look at an invoice level updated online version of which there is a charge. So I think that's one area that I would like to see at least definitely picked up. There was a talk about public credit registry many years back. We are looking at that getting revitalized, but I think that's going to be very, very crucial in terms for at least for the lenders to kind of get comfortable about financing invoices. And I think there is a either at RBI level or at a cross bank level, there has to be an initiative to kind of popularize that. So I think that's one, if that comes in, along with, I think, movement of information on the account aggregation side, which is now, I think, kind of spearheaded by RBIH, I think you will have a lot of information that allows for lending to happen very efficiently for banks. Otherwise, low ticket sizes loans, short-term loans, I think are very difficult for any lender to kind of justify in terms of a profit making. Or the cost goes up considerably. I think with these innovations, I think it will become easier in India, the spreads on the business, the net margin that any small business enjoys, and I think I'm sure Abhishek with Tally experience is not more than 2 to 5%. So you can't be paying interest costs at 2-3% a month. It simply eats away completely on any income you make. So you have to kind of reduce that cost to less than 100 basis points a month. The only way to do that is to give lenders the ability to understand and underwrite the risk and give them data to kind of give comfort about it. And I think if we can get the PCR equivalent on the transactional documents, trade documents, I think you cut away a lot of the risk premium that's get associated with pricing. So I think that's the one.
Very well, sir. I think, Ram, it is said that people who have the fund has the easier access and the cheaper access to funds than people don't have the fund actually. So I think very well. So maybe we would like to add to this that was regulatory.
Yeah, I think Ram has very well covered it. A lot of fabulous facilitation has been done, right? Whether it's the government, NPCI, NBBL. Look, we're very thankful for clearing and standardizing a lot of the challenges that we faced. I think if I was to say, if I have 3 wishes, right? One is clearly on the cross-border side, right? I mean, the way I see it is, I used to work in Hong Kong till about 4 years back. Look, I think each of these countries with India deals with, and Prime Minister Modi has set a very ambitious target for India as an economy to be an export powerhouse over the next kind of 10 years or so. it's very important for the G2G connect to be able to say, look, domestically we've got all this working well. Now, how do we basically link up a provider rail, say with Singapore or with UAE, to actually facilitate the import-export part of it? Second, what would be very helpful is, on supply chain specifically, deep tier financing has just not taken off in India to the extent there is a potential. It cannot also take off, in my view, unless you have tokenization. And tokenization is what has worked very well in markets like China. So I think some element of facilitation on that will go a long way to help out the deep tier supply chain finance, including the MSMEs. Third is, look, there is a significant focus by the government to internationalize the rupee. And some, on the B2C side, look, I mean, a lot of the rails have been laid with NPCI International, right? So a conversation point needs to be potentially that, look, how do we find a way to enhance those rails? There can be some value considerations, right? But can we actually have some smaller ticket B2B transactions riding on the same rails, right? That will again be facilitative. So those will be the 2 or 3 wishes that I would perhaps want to put on the list.
Thank you, Faye. Abhishek would like to add to that.
Yeah, for sure. I echo the points made by Ram and Vivek that a lot of good things happening around, not only in payments, even something like ONDC. I think it's quite amazing the way India is looking at digital aspects and the way businesses are sort of adopting it. If I just need to call out certain things which I would prefer or look at, and it could be controversial, is about onboarding. When it comes to, say, MSME, that how do I onboard them very fast and easily with less paperwork or less time consuming aspects. But yeah, that's a double-edged sword, so we'll have to be careful on that. And also from like a technology provider, how do I be out of a very stringent regulatory aspect? Because I'm just a rail, and from that aspect, we do encounter a lot of times that if we have to get into the path of the payments or anything to do with payments, we do come under regulatory, which we want to avoid because that is not our core business. Even something like GST, I think it's totally technology based compliance system, but unfortunately, again, the payment for GST is not something which you can automate very easily. So yeah, these are the things I think if happens, tax payments, onboarding sort of things, I think it will make a big difference to make sure that other technology players come into the play and make a huge difference in the system.
Thank you. I think wonderful points being made. So I think that's now the last question from my side. So first, again, question to you, Ram, that Vayana's future plans to expanding B2B payment solutions, entering new markets, new use cases?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I think 2-3 areas stand out, right? The whole aspect about making working capital efficient, what Vivek talked about, right, for small businesses. How do you get their collections in faster? How do you make their payments more efficient so that they can actually reduce the need for credit? I think that's a definite aim. The second, obviously, aim is to kind of help in reconciliation wherever we can. And the third is, I think, to kind of reduce the risk premium that lenders have by providing more information and by making sure that the transactions are above board. I think those are 3 areas that we see at scale this working. So those are 3 areas of focus for us.
We want to Abhishek. So Tally is one of the leading accounting platform. I think that's a question on everyone's mind, that what is the Tally's plan of venturing into B2B payment and collections?
To a large extent, we are already part of it. I think, and we are working with NPCI, a very pleasurable thing to mention. About 2 years back, we actually integrated with a couple of payment gateways where the SME businesses who are our primary customers, they could send a payment request to their customers, So the collections become much faster, as we have been discussing about the working capital and the challenges around faster collection. So we already enable that for our customers. Currently, we are working with some of the banks to sort of integrate to make sure that the payment and the recon becomes much more seamless, much more faster and easier for the customers, so that at any given point in time, they have real-time accurate information to ensure that they can take the right actions as soon as possible. And yeah, I think overall we feel that from a business perspective, it is not only about the payment part or the collection part. The way we are focusing going forward is that every business is now connected to various stakeholders, whether it is bank, as I mentioned, whether it is the GST department, whether it is their CA, whether it is their branch offices. So we are ensuring that entire connectivity aspect of for a business requirement, we are able to cater to that, which includes payment, which includes compliance, which includes banking and sort of things. So that is how we are ensuring that customers who are using Tally can get most out of us.
Now to you, Vivek. So Axis Bank been always in the forefront of innovations. So what we can what's the ongoing or future initiatives of Axis Bank on this field of B2B payments and collections?
Look, so I think like I covered, we've already put forward a number of initiatives which are being commercialized as we speak. So we have Neo for Business, which is actually banking and a beyond banking solution that allows a customer outside of making B2B payments and collection to also be able to manage their inventories, to be able to do a whole bunch of other things which will actually make it a one-stop shop as far as a customer is concerned. I spoke about the fact that we have an ARS collection solution which allows not only collections to be streamlined but also supply chain finance to be put into place. I think what we are trying to do going forward is to see, as it relates to the customer's ecosystem, right? How do we become a much more central part of very large customers and their value chains, right? That is a part that I think needs a lot more work. That is where our current capabilities are focused on.
Thank you, Pika. I think wonderful insights from all of you, and I think we can go on with more questions because on every point you're making, I think I have more questions coming on my mind. But I think I will stop here and I would open it for the floor to us.
I think RTGS has been implemented in India in 2004. It's 20 years and we still see reconciliation issues. So listening to the panel, I heard two approaches. One is the use case based approach where what the customer needs to do if he wants to do collection, which Abhishek mentioned, which Tally is trying to do. It's a use case based approach and that can solve problems. The other one is what Vivek is saying is the ecosystem based approach. So which way should we go ahead? Because beyond a point, till the time the payment is divorced from the actual use case, you will have reconciliation issues because we are treating the payment as end leg of a transaction. Everything happens and then you have to make payments. So either you take out your wallet or pay, do RTGS or whatever you want to do. So that's a separate from the entire transaction. Whereas unless you treat it as a use case, you will never have the entire reconciliation problem solved. So which approach is better is my question.
Yeah, so look, thanks for the question. I mean, I think it has to be an and story, right? It can't be one versus the other because adoption will be at different paces, right? I mean, so we got to solve for the anchor and we got to solve for the customer. There will be a customer that will be selling to 3 anchors. So essentially, they need to be equipped to be able to actually deal with that scenario as well, as opposed to just being part of one anchor's supply chain. So look, I think the interoperability piece will actually solve for a lot of these challenges going forward, right? By becoming part of, say, for instance, what NBBL is trying to build on BBPS, etc. The interoperability piece will make sure that there is a wider ecosystem that is being created, right? So in that sense of the word, the choice gets totally democratized as far as the MSME is concerned in terms of making the payment through XYZ means, irrespective of whether they're part of ecosystem 1 or ecosystem 2. I think that is where pretty much the solution would lie.
Abhishek would like to add anything?
The aspect of recon definitely, as we have been discussing, is a concern and a big aspect for any business because, as I said, they don't have the real-time information if they don't have the right recon. So it also depends on the richness of the data which exists in my system, whichever system I'm generating the payment from or I'm doing the accounting in, and the data which actually comes from the bank or the payment provider. Because ultimately, if we have to automate that, there has to be commonality between two data. That how can we make sure that from a system perspective, we can suggest to the customer that, okay, these transactions are reconciled. These are partly maybe matching. These are totally not matching or something of that sort. I think we as different players of the industry have to come together and ensure that how can we as combined give this solution to the customers. And as Vivek said, it's a and thing, it's not this or that. So yeah, I'll go with that.
Yeah. thanks.
I have a question regarding that there is a trust deficit generally in the market, which hampers especially the distributor side, where they have to pay in advance to the the anchor company, while the retailers are going to pay them, let's say 15 days or 30 days later. So that creates a lot of challenges for MSME distributors especially. So are there any processes, payment processes especially, which we can look at to solve for that particular problem? Any thoughts on that would be welcome.
If I understood the question correct, and Vivek, correct me if I'm wrong, if like trades is something which I think is trying to solve that to a very large extent. So there are different initiatives which have been taken, even as a company like Tally. We are trying to ensure that we are able to make the life of customers easier when it comes to financing, when it comes to making sure that they, as per the requirement of the cash flow or working capital, they get finance very easily. Because the data in their Tally is very rich, that helps them be more credible in front of the lender, and those are the things we are trying to do. I'm not sure whether that's answering your question directly, but yeah, just wanted to mention that.
So, we correct that?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly add. So I think what you're talking about is a working capital gap. I don't think so one can do much about the equation between the anchor wanting money in advance. That's a commercial conversation. What we can certainly try to solve for is there's a 15-day working capital gap that needs to be bridged. So I think what we've done on our side is build together capabilities on the digital underwriting side on supply chain that can actually, intraday come out with a credit limit which is advised through a message to the customer, to the distributor in question, who can therefore provide digitally a bunch of documents, and therefore one is up and running in terms of accessing that working capital. So those are the kind of ways and means by which the gap can be met expeditiously so that the MSME is not kind of hindered in any way.
Ram, I think it's your field as well, so maybe
Well, look, I mean, as Vivek said, right, I mean, the working capital gaps are always there, and most companies, I think, work under a negative or have a working capital gap. And I think there are enough number of solutions out there. I think the question really, at least from a Vienna perspective, that we have been grappling for a long period of time, and I don't think we still have a satisfactory answer, is really that the micro and small part of that MSME definition that we all kind of put out. How do you kind of facilitate financing of the trade that's happening between them? I'm not talking about large companies. I think with the value chain from large companies to down is pretty well mapped. I think really speaking, if you next time go to a retailer and you find that you'll have a lot of unbranded goods that he's selling, he's sourcing it from another MSME business, and that fellow is sourcing his suppliers from another MSME set. Now that working capital gap that exists, and that's not insignificant. That problem statement, I think, is still something to be solved yet. And I think if you really want to kind of create impact and scale, then I think that's the area that I would say still we have to put in some level of infrastructure, interoperability, data, and really work at systems that kind of help that kind of trade to flourish. Because ultimately, I think India also socially is also facing an employment issue, right? So you also want to make sure that all of these small enterprises are actually spending time, as Vivek said, on the business rather than figuring out how to kind of finance a working capital gap. But the solution set available there is really today informal. So you really have to kind of work on that, I would say, at that aspect. The other parts of it, I think working capital gaps between large companies, their distributors and their further chain, I think banks have been doing tremendous job over the period of years to kind of get that ecosystem covered. So I think that's pretty much a problem. If not fully solved, at least solution is no.